I was the black sheep, ignored at family gatherings, until one day I inherited everything and watched them all come crawling back. For 28 years, I was invisible at every holiday dinner. While my cousins were praised for their mediocre accomplishments, I could have cured cancer, and they would still ask when I was going to get a real job. My Aunt Veronica would literally walk around me to hug the person standing behind me. Uncle Randall would introduce his children to strangers, but completely forget I existed. This is my nephew, Theo, the doctor, and this is my daughter, Eva, the lawyer. He beamed at dinner parties, his chest swelling with pride. Then his gaze would slide right past me like I was a piece of furniture, even though I was standing right there, holding the bottle of wine I'd brought as a hostess gift. Always expensive wine because I'd learned early on that cheap gifts gave them another reason to brush me off. My crime? I'd dropped out of law school in my second year to start a tech company. In their eyes, I was a loser who'd given up a prestigious career to play with computers. The fact that my company, CloudSync Solutions, was thriving and making 7 figures a year meant nothing to them. I wasn't a lawyer or a doctor or a banker, so I didn't exist in their carefully constructed social hierarchy. Quinn's going through a phase, my mother explained to relatives who asked about my absence from family events. He'll eventually come to his senses and finish law school. This was 7 years after I'd closed my first $1 million client. I'd stopped trying after my college commencement. I'd earned a master's degree in computer science while working full-time, maintaining a 4.0 GPA despite working 60-hour weeks between my startup and my degree program. When I shared the news in the family chat room, along with a photo of myself in cap and gown, there was total silence. 3 days of radio silence. Meanwhile, when my cousin Finn got promoted to assistant manager at the coffee shop, a job that paid $12 an hour, it prompted 47 congratulations, 3 separate invitations to a holiday dinner, and a group gift of a gold watch for the successful businessman in the family. The irony was not lost on me. I was employing 15 people at the time. At Christmas dinners, I sat at the kids' table, even though I was 28 and older than half the adults present. My place was forever between my 7-year-old second cousin and the high chair. At weddings, I was left out of family photos. I was literally asked to step aside so they could take family photos only, as if my DNA had somehow been nullified. "Could you bring this to us?" they would ask, handing me their phones as if I were a hired photographer. During their conversations, they would refer to me as a ghost, discussing my life in the third person while I stood right there, sipping beer and wondering why I'd driven 3 hours for this indignity. "What happened to Quinn?" Aunt Veronica would ask my mother, as if I wasn't sitting 3 feet away at the same dining room table. "Oh, he's still doing that computer thing," my mother would say dismissively, waving her hand like she was swatting a fly while playing with websites or something. My web business just landed a deal with a Fortune 500 company, but why let the facts get in the way of a good story? The worst part was that I kept showing up. Some pathetic part of me still hoped that something would change. That maybe this time they would ask about my life with genuine interest. That maybe this time they would treat me like family. It never happened. Then my grandmother, Eris, died. I was the only one who visited her weekly at Sunset Manor, a sprawling nursing home that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Every Tuesday at 6 o'clock, I would walk through the automatic doors with a small cooler containing homemade chocolate chip cookies, her favorite recipe, which she had taught me when I was 12 and spending the summer at her house. The staff knew me by name. "Quinn is here for Mrs. Patterson," they would announce over the intercom, and you could hear the genuine warmth in their voices. The nurses updated me on her condition, asked about my business, remembered details of my life that my own family had forgotten. Meanwhile, the rest of the family treated Grandma Eris like a routine task. Aunt Veronica visited twice in 5 years, both times to ask about updating her will. Uncle Randall sent flowers for her birthday but couldn't remember which grandchild belonged to which set of parents during their brief phone conversations. "Tell me about Quinn's company again," she'd say during our chess games, her tanned hands moving the pieces with uncanny precision. "About this cloud storage," and I'd explain it all. Customer acquisition strategies, server infrastructure, the upcoming expansion into mobile apps. Her eyes would light up with genuine interest, and she would ask probing questions that showed she was really listening, really processing what I was telling her. "You know," she would say, leaning back in her chair as I set up the chessboard, "I built my family's construction business from scratch in 1952. Started with your grandfather and a pickup truck. Everyone said a woman couldn't run a construction company." She would smile, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I proved it to them, didn't I? Made more money than any of their husbands ever did." These were stories she shared with no one else. At family gatherings, she would sit quietly in the corner while everyone else dominated the conversation with their accomplishments. But with me, she talked for hours about building a business, the early struggles, the satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. "You remind me of myself at your age," she'd tell me, taking my bishop with her knight. Too stubborn to give up, too smart to fail. She was as sharp as a bat to the end, remembering the intricate details of my business strategies that my own parents had never bothered to learn. When I landed my biggest contract yet, a 3-year, $2.4 million deal, she was the only member of the family who understood what it meant. "That's empire-building money," she'd said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." When she died, I was holding her hand. The rest of the family was at Cousin Theo's engagement party, an event I wasn't invited to despite living in the same town and despite the fact that the party was at a country club where I'd helped Theo get a membership through a business connection. I learned of her death via a text message from my mother. "Mom passed away this afternoon. Funeral arrangements to be determined. No call, no face-to-face, just a group text, like announcing a change in dinner plans." When the lawyer called to probate the will, I almost didn't go. Yet another family event where I would be treated like hired help, expected to sit in the back and keep quiet while the adults did important things. But something urgent in Morrison's lawyer's voice made me change my mind. "Mr. Patterson specifically requested your presence," he said. "She made it very clear that you needed to be there." The entire family was crowded into Morrison and Associates like vultures circling a fresh roadkill. The law office was all mahogany and leather, the kind of old-fashioned gentility that made you whisper automatically. Aunt Veronica had even brought a leather portfolio to organize her probate papers, with color-coded tabs and a calculator for quick calculations. Uncle Randall was already discussing the tax implications of the estate with his wife in a hushed voice, wondering aloud whether they should sell the mansion immediately or rent it out for passive income. Cousin Ava searched for luxury cars on her phone, selecting BMWs and Mercedes models with the expectation that she would soon have a down payment on any of them. They all assumed that Grandma Eris would split it evenly among her children and grandchildren. The estate was valued at nearly $20 million. A sprawling Victorian mansion worth $2.3 million, diversified investment portfolios worth $4.1 million, and the family construction business worth $12 million and change. Even divided 12 ways, everyone would have millions. I sat in the back corner, invisible as always, watching them count money that wasn't theirs yet, pretending to care about the woman who had died to make it available. Attorney Morrison cleared his throat and began reading in his practiced monotone. "I, Heiress Elizabeth Patterson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The standard legal language followed, revoking previous wills, appointing executors, the usual formality that makes lawyers rich and families poor. Then came the real meat. "To my beloved family, I leave exactly what you have given me in recent years." There was an embarrassed murmur around the room. Aunt Veronica stopped writing. Uncle Randall looked up from his tax calculations. "To my daughter Veronica, who has visited me twice in 5 years and forgotten my last 3 birthdays, I leave my disappointment and best wishes for your future endeavors." The room went completely silent. There was the hum of the air conditioner, the secretary typing in the next office, the distant traffic from the street below. Aunt Veronica's face went white. "There must be a mistake," she stammered. Attorney Morrison continued reading, not missing a word. "To my son Randall, who sent flowers once a year but could not remember which grandchildren belonged to which parents during our telephone conversations, I leave my deep regret at your choice and hope that you will learn to appreciate the value of being present over gifts." Uncle Randall began to object, but Morrison raised his hand. "To my grandchildren, Theo, Ava, Finn, and the others who have inherited their parents' priorities, I leave the same attention and care that you have shown me, which is none." The silence was deafening. Several family members open-mouthed. "To my grandson Quinn, who held my hand every Tuesday for 6 years, who remembered my birthday with homemade cookies, who listened to my stories and shared his dreams, who was the only one who truly knew me as a person and not as a bank account, I leave everything else." My stomach sank. Everything else meant the mansion, the briefcases, the construction business, everything they had mentally divided between them for the past hour. "And," Morrison continued, "I had prepared individual letters for family members to be distributed at my discretion." He handed me a thick envelope marked "For Quinn's eyes only" in Grandma Eris's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note that made my hands shake. "My dear Quinn, if you're reading this, it means my funeral is over and the vultures have gathered to pick my bones. I'm sure they're surprised by my decisions, but you shouldn't be. I've watched this family for 93 years, and I know exactly who's who. You were the only one who saw me as a person worth knowing. While they saw dollar signs, you saw Grandma. While they were calculating inheritance shares, you brought me cookies and asked about my childhood. Now they're going to come for you. They're going to try every manipulation, every guilt game, every sob story in the book. They're going to appeal to family loyalty by demonstrating it themselves. They will promise change without learning from their mistakes. Be prepared." I also left Morrison with specific instructions regarding any attempt to contest this will. "Let's just say I've been documenting their absence for years. You built something beautiful from nothing, as have I. Don't let them ruin it. All my love, Grandma Eris." The construction business books are in the safe in the basement. The combination is your birthday spelled backwards. I think you'll find it interesting reading about the business loans some family members have taken out that have never been repaid. The room exploded. This was ridiculous. Aunt Veronica shrieked, her carefully maintained composure cracking like old paint. Mother was clearly not herself. "We will contest this," Uncle Randall said, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "This is elder abuse, pure and simple." Cousin Thea was frantically typing a message to someone, probably a lawyer friend from law school. Ava was crying, real tears, which was impressive since I had never seen her cry over anything that didn't directly involve her bank account. In the midst of all this chaos, Attorney Morrison sat quietly, letting them exhaust themselves with threats and accusations. Finally, when the screaming died down, he spoke. Mrs. Patterson had anticipated this reaction. She had prepared additional documents. He opened the folder and spread its contents out on his desk. Medical reports, cognitive evaluations, psychiatric consultations. Your mother had undergone extensive mental competency testing over the past 6 months. Every appraisal confirms that she was perfectly sane when she made these decisions. She also asked me to tell you the following. He put on his reading glasses. Any attempt to challenge this will would result in the immediate release of certain family financial records that Mrs. Patterson had kept for years. That included documentation of bad loans, questionable business practices, and tax irregularities that would be of interest to the Internal Revenue Service. The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of people who realized they had been outsmarted by someone they had underestimated. Aunt Veronica's face turned from white to green. Uncle Randall was sweating despite the air conditioning. "She wouldn't," Veronica whispered. "She was a businesswoman for 70 years, Morrison said. She kept excellent records, and just like that, all the fighting went out of them. Not because they accepted the validity of the will, but because they were caught red-handed in schemes I was only beginning to understand. I walked out of that office that afternoon clutching documents that made me one of the richest men in the state and holding secrets that could destroy the family members who had spent decades eroding my self-esteem. The phone call started before I even got to my car. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with messages, text after text from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Aunt Veronica, Quinn, honey, we need to talk. Family dinner at my house tonight, 7 o'clock? Right. Uncle Randall, hey buddy, haven't heard from you in ages. Want to grab coffee tomorrow? It's on me. Cousin Theo, congrats on the inheritance, man. We need to celebrate. Drinks are on me. Ava, Quinn, I've been meaning to call for weeks. I miss talking to you. Even my parents, who lived across town and hadn't spoken to me in 3 months except to ask if I was still playing with computers, suddenly wanted to reconnect as a family. Aunt Veronica's dinner invitation wasn't a request. It was an invitation disguised as hospitality. I almost went. Part of me wanted to disappear, to mull over this life-changing moment in solitude, to figure out what the hell I was doing with $20 million in a construction company I knew nothing about running. But another part of me, the part that had been invisible for 28 years, wanted to see what desperation looked like on the faces of the people who had made me feel worthless for decades. I arrived at Uncle Randall's house to find everyone waiting, but something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in my life, every face turned to look at me when I walked through the door. Not someone behind me, not someone more important. Me, Quinn. Veronica practically threw herself at me with an embrace, enveloping me in expensive perfume and fake enthusiasm. You look great. How's business? I've been meaning to ask about your company for a long time. It was the first time she'd asked about my job in 15 years. The first time she'd said my name without wincing, as if it were unpalatable. We were all talking, Uncle Randall said, motioning me to a seat at the head of the dining room table. A seat I'd never been offered before, even when I'd been the only family member to show up for someone's birthday party. The head of the table, where the most important person sat. For 28 years I'd eaten at the kiddie table, on the kitchen counter, on folding chairs brought in from the garage. Now I was being ushered into the patriarch's chair, like some returning king. "We're so proud of you," Randall went on, pushing back his chair with exaggerated formality. Cousin Theo nodded enthusiastically, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like hero worship. "I was just telling everyone how smart you've always been. Remember when we were kids and you built that computer from scratch? I always knew you'd be successful." I looked at him. "You called it a waste of time and broke it on purpose." His smile faltered for a moment before reforming. "Kids, right? We didn't understand genius when we saw it. The revisionist history was mind-boggling. Suddenly, every family member had fond memories of supporting my dreams. Every slight was rewritten as encouragement. Every slight became a misunderstanding. "I always told people you were the smart one in the family," said Aunt Veronica, who literally introduced me as Randall's weird nephew at our last dinner. "We knew that computer thing would work eventually," added my mother, who had been telling people for years that I was going through a phase. The conversation went on like this for an hour. A complete rewrite of 28 years of family history, delivered with straight faces and earnest voices. But I could see the calculation behind their eyes, the way they weighed every word for maximum effect. It wasn't remorse, it was strategy. "The point is," Aunt Veronica said carefully, setting down her glass of wine and leaning forward with mock concern, "we're worried about you managing such a large inheritance on your own. It's a huge responsibility." "Overwhelming," Uncle Randall agreed. "Life-changing money requires careful management." "We want to help," Theo added. "A family needs to stick together, especially during such a big change." Cousin Ava, who had been silent until now, pulled out a folder that looked suspiciously prepared. "Maybe we could set up a family trust," she suggested, spreading the papers on the table, "to draw on the inheritance for the benefit of all, to share the responsibilities and the benefits." That was the real reason for this sudden family reunion. They had spent the afternoon with lawyers and financial advisors figuring out how to get the money that was legally mine. The idea of a family trust had probably been Uncle Randall's. He was always good at making selfish schemes sound philanthropic. "Grandma Eris would have wanted us to share," Veronica said, her voice full of mock emotion. "She always believed in family unity. She wouldn't want her decision to divide us," Randall added. "Blood is thicker than water." I almost laughed. These people who had ignored their own mother for years were now claiming to know what she would have wanted. "You're absolutely right," I said finally. "Money shouldn't divide families." Their faces lit up with relief. Victory was at hand. "In fact," I continued, "I've learned so much about family this week." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I'd been using for years to record conversations, initially just so I could watch them back later and figure out what I was doing wrong in social situations. Turns out I wasn't doing anything wrong at all, like learning that Aunt Veronica had called me a basement-dwelling loser who would never amount to anything last Christmas. "Want to hear the recording?" Her face went pale. The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the wooden floor. Or Uncle Randall's theory that I must be autistic because I can't understand social cues or pick up on hints. "I have that too." He started to stutter. His confident demeanor was cracking like ice in the spring. "My personal favorite is Cousin Ava explaining to her sorority sisters why she doesn't include me in family photos. Something about not wanting to be associated with family embarrassment and how my presence would hurt her social media image. I've been recording family conversations for years. Initially, I was just trying to figure out where I was going wrong, why I couldn't connect with these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The recordings painted a clear picture. The problem wasn't me, it was you. "Veronica, please," Veronica began, but I raised my hand. "Let me share my favorite conversation," I said, flipping through months of audio files. "It's from Easter dinner this year. You might remember, Veronica. You were explaining to Mom why I shouldn't be invited to family events anymore." I pressed play. Veronica's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the speaker on my phone. "He's just so awkward and, frankly, a little pathetic. Still playing with computers at his age. Theo's a doctor, Ava's a lawyer, Finn's moving up in management. What does Quinn have to show for it? Some stupid website that's probably going to fail anyway." Current Veronica looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Oh, but here's the best part," I continued, skipping ahead to another section. Uncle Randall's voice. This kid is delusional if he thinks working on computers is a real career. When he comes back to reality, maybe I'll give him some construction work. Physical labor might teach him humility. The silence in the room was deafening. For 6 years, I said quietly, I watched Grandma Iris ask where everyone was. Every Tuesday she'd look at the door during dinner, hoping one of you would stop by. She'd save newspaper clippings of your accomplishments, wanting to feel connected to her family. Cousin Theo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She'd ask me to show her the Facebook photos of you on my phone because she missed you. She worried she'd done something wrong, that she'd somehow failed as a grandmother. I stood up from the head of the table, that symbolic spot they'd given me as a prop in their game of manipulation. I told her, "You've all just been busy." I continued, "I made up excuses for you because I didn't want her to feel abandoned." But she knew. She was 93, not stupid. "Quinn, please," Veronica began again. She knew her own children had visited her twice in 5 years. She knew her grandchildren didn't remember her birthday. She knew the only time anyone called was to ask about an inheritance or update her will. I walked toward the door, their eyes following me like a departing deity. Do you want to know what Grandma Iris really wanted? She wanted her family to visit, to call her, to remember her birthday, to treat her grandson, me, with basic human decency. "We made mistakes," Uncle Randall said desperately, "but we can change. We're family." "You're absolutely right," I said, pausing at the threshold. "We're a family, and I'm giving you exactly what you've given me all these years." I looked each of them in the eye. Nothing. The fallout was swift and brutal. The calls began immediately, then the emails, then the lawyers. They tried everything to get their hands on the inheritance. First came the emotional appeals, the tearful voicemails about family ties and second chances. Then came the accusations that I was dishonoring Grandma Iris by being vindictive. When the emotional manipulations failed, they turned to legal wrangling. They tried to challenge the will, arguing that Grandma Iris was mentally incompetent when she made her decisions. Their case fell apart within a week when my attorney presented 6 years of video evidence demonstrating her sharp mind and clear reasoning. The recordings I'd made of our chess games and conversations, originally intended only to preserve the memories of our time together. Recordings of her rationale for disinheriting them certainly didn't help their case. Grandma Iris had methodically documented her reasoning, and her words were devastating in their clarity. Quinn was the only one who treated me like a person, not a bank account. He'd earned this inheritance through 6 years of genuine care and attention. The rest of us can make our own way in life, just like he did. Then they tried to claim that I had manipulated her, that I had somehow exerted undue influence over her to turn her against her own children. This strategy collapsed when the nursing home staff testified to my weekly visits and the family's complete absence. The head nurse's testimony was particularly damning. For 6 years, Mr. Quinn had never missed a Tuesday visit. Mrs. Patterson would get agitated on Monday nights, asking the staff if we thought Quinn would bring cookies that week. We saw the rest of the family twice a year, usually at Christmas or when they needed to sign something. 3 months after the will was read, the legal wrangling was over. The inheritance was officially and unconditionally mine. That's when the real fallout began. Aunt Veronica lost her house. She'd been living beyond her means for years, maxing out her credit cards and borrowing against an expected inheritance. When the inheritance didn't come through, the bills came all at once. The foreclosure notice was posted on a Tuesday, the same day of the week I usually visited Grandma Iris. Uncle Randall's restaurant was next to close. He'd expanded too aggressively, counting on the inheritance to cover the debt. Without that safety net, the business collapsed in spectacular fashion. The health department found violations during a final inspection, and local newspapers covered the closure with headlines like, "Family Restaurant Serves Last Meal." Cousin Theo had to move back in with his parents after his engagement fell through. It turned out his fiancée was more interested in his family's wealth than his salary as a pediatrician. When she learned of the will, she returned the ring and moved in with a cardiologist whose family owned the real assets. The family had lived beyond their means for years, counting on the inheritance to solve their financial problems. Without that expected payoff, their house of cards collapsed spectacularly. My parents made a last-ditch attempt at reconciliation. 6 months later, they showed up at my office, the plush downtown space I'd rented after moving my company out of my home garage, with tears in their eyes and rehearsed speeches about family healing. "We love you," my mother said, her voice trembling with genuine emotion or practiced manipulation. "The money doesn't matter. We just want our son back." "That's great," I said, not looking up from the financial statements spread out on my desk. Where was that love when I graduated from college? When I started my business? When I needed emotional support during my divorce? My father cleared his throat, straightening his tie as if preparing for a business presentation. We weren't perfect parents, Quinn, but we can start over. Family is forever. You're right, I said, finally meeting his eyes. You can start over just like I did when I stopped expecting anything from this family. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the check I'd prepared weeks earlier, knowing this conversation was inevitable. That's how much you've spent on my birthday presents over the last decade combined, I said, handing him a check for $500. Consider us even. The look on their faces was priceless. A mixture of shock and pain and the dawning realization that their son was no longer the simpleton they'd raised. A year later, I ran into cousin Ava at a coffee shop downtown. She looked terrible, haggard, stressed, dressed in clothes that had seen better days. No designer handbags, no manicured nails. She was working 3 jobs to pay off her credit card debt, living in a studio that cost more than she could afford. Quinn, she said quietly when she noticed me in line, I know I don't deserve to ask, but can we talk? Really talk? I studied her face, looking for the manipulations I was accustomed to, the calculating expressions that had defined every family interaction for the past 28 years. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse. I was thinking about what you said that night, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The way we treated you, the way we treated Grandma Iris. You were right about everything. She began to cry, not the showy tears she'd shed during the reading of the will, but real, ugly sobs that made the other buyers stare. I was so angry at you for not sharing, she said. But the truth is, I'm angry at myself. We all are. We knew we were terrible to you, and we did it anyway. Why? I asked, genuinely curious after all these years. Because it was easier than admitting we were jealous, she said, wiping her nose with a coffee shop napkin. You were always the smartest, the most driven, the most genuine. You built something real while we drifted on family connections and expectations, and instead of celebrating it, we punished you for it. For the first time in your life, a family member was taking real responsibility. No blame shifting, no excuses, no trying to minimize their actions, just the honest, painful truth. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, and I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that some of us are finally realizing what we've lost. I bought her coffee, a small gesture but meaningful. We sat in the corner of a booth for 2 hours while she told me about being fired from her law firm, about the debt she'd racked up trying to maintain a lifestyle that didn't match her real income, about the friends who'd disappeared as her circumstances changed. I'm learning what you've known all along, she said, that the only thing worth having is what you earn. 6 months later, Ava was the only family member I'd invited to my wedding. She'd asked for nothing more than the chance to be a real cousin. She helped plan the reception, gave a speech about how proud she was of the man I had become despite my family's treatment, and never once mentioned money, inheritance, or the past. The rest of the family saw the wedding photos on social media. Uncle Randall commented with congratulations and a subtle nod to his ongoing financial difficulties. I deleted the comment without responding. Cousin Theo sent a long, private message explaining how he had always supported me and how he hoped we could repair our relationship. I read it once and archived it without responding. My parents never reached out, and it was probably for the best. 3 years later, I run a nonprofit foundation named after my grandmother, Iris, that funds technology education for low-income kids who remind me of myself at that age. Smart, driven, but lacking family support and financial resources. The construction business has expanded into 3 new markets under professional management. I kept it going not because I needed the money, but because Grandma Iris built it from scratch, and I refused to let her life's work die with her. The mansion has been converted into a community center that offers after-school programs, job training, and small business development courses. There's a plaque by the front door, the Iris Patterson Community Center, where everyone has a place. Sometimes I wonder if I should have been more forgiving, if I should have given them a second chance, shared the wealth, tried to repair that family relationship. Then I think back to Tuesday nights with Grandma Iris, holding her hand as she asked why her family had forgotten her. And I know I made the right choice. Some things can't be bought, and forgiveness is one of them. It must be earned through actions, not words. Consistency, not convenience. Presence, not appearance. And after 28 years of invisibility, I finally realized that my presence was a gift, to be earned, not demanded. The black sheep doesn't always stay with the flock. Sometimes it finds a better flock.